Each month, several items are produced by BuildUp, such as overview articles and technical articles, infographics, but that's not all. BuildUp also offers the opportunity to host webinars on topics related to energy efficiency and renewable energy in buildings. More recently, BuildUp has opened the opportunity to distinguished experts in the field to share their knowledge in front of our cameras in our BuildUp Expert Talks. The BuildUp portal shares daily the most relevant events in the field of energy efficiency and renewable energy, but we also participate actively in many European events around the year, such as EPB Center and Riva conferences, H2020 DRIVE and construction events, Covenant of Mayors, and so on, with the aim of further disseminating the results and helping to create high-quality media content. The BuildUp portal is updated daily, reaching around 120 new items each month, including news, events, publications, articles, video content, and many more content. But BuildUp is not only us. BuildUp is a community, and we invite you to be part of it. By becoming a member, you can contribute by uploading your own content and promoting your news, events, publications, and so on. By contributing content, BuildUp will help you to reach a broader audience through our online portal, our social media channels, and our monthly newsletter. Visit us to find out more. It is a pleasure for BuildUp to host the first webinar of the Circular Talks webinar series entitled Let's Talk Circular Architecture, brought to you by the Drive Zero project. The Circular Talks series of webinars aims to present and promote the circular and consumer-centered business model developed in the framework of Drive Zero. The series includes 3 webinars tailor-made for the specific target groups involved in the renovation process of the building stock. Today, in the first webinar of the series, we will explore how architects can play a crucial role in this scenario by incorporating circular principles into their design process, acknowledging the Drive Zero circular business models, implementing the circular business models in their professional practice. The webinar will also show how 2 of the 7 Drive Zero demonstration buildings have been circularly renovated and how the European policies can assist architects in their circular journey. In today's agenda, we will start by hearing from Gloria Oddo, Architect and Project Officer at the Architects Council of Europe, who will introduce us to the Drive Zero project. Elettra Agliardi, full professor at the University of Bologna, Department of Economics, will then discuss Drive Zero circular business models as a tool to assist architects in the design process. Patrick Daly, researcher and consultant at the Technological University of Dublin, will then present the Circular Deep Renovation Intervention for the Drive Zero Irish pilot and possible applications of circular business models. This will then be followed by a presentation of the Circular Deep Renovation Intervention for the Drive Zero Italian pilot and possible application of the CBM from Cecilia Mazzoli, Assistant Professor at the University of Bologna, Department of Architecture. After Cecilia's presentation, there will be an interactive poll moderated by BuildUp. Finally, the last presentation will be from Philippe Mosley, Policy Officer at DG GROW, Construction Unit at European Commission, on how a circular approach can speed up the uptake of the European building stock. We will round off the webinar with a Q&A session moderated by BuildUp and some final remarks from the University of Bologna. We invite the audience to send us questions through the GoToWebinar platform that can be answered during the Q&A session at the end. Please specify which presenter your question is for. You will be able to find the recording on the BuildUp portal and on our YouTube channel in the coming days, together with the presentation slides. Before we begin the presentations, we start with a quick introductory poll. So you should be able to see a poll window on the screen. So let's start with the first question. Where are you based? Please select one. Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, Western Europe, or other. You can specify in the chat. I will leave you a few seconds. Okay, so maybe let's see the results. Okay, so there is 29% both for Eastern Europe and Western Europe, then Northern Europe and Southern Europe. Good, so let's move on to the second question. What is your profession? Architect, building manager, designer or engineer, European representative, researcher, student or other? You can specify in the chat again. I'll leave you a few seconds. Okay, maybe we can see the results now. Okay, most of you are architects, then designer, engineers, building manager, but I see also 33% of researchers, students, or others. Okay, so let's move on to the third question. Are you familiar with the circularity concepts? Yes, totally, yes, partially, or no? Okay, let's see the answers. Yes, partially. Most of you. Okay, so you sure will learn more about this during the webinar. Okay, so this is the end of the first poll. There will be another one later. So we move now to the first speaker, Gloria Oddo. So Gloria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a few seconds to take control of the slides. Okay. Thank you, Julia. My name is Gloria Oddo. I'm a project officer at the Architects Council of Europe, and I'm an architect as well, and also a communication and dissemination leader of the Drive Zero project. Just a few seconds because, okay. The Drive Zero project was funded in the framework of the H2020 Horizon 2020 fund, and aims at speeding up the circular renovation of buildings. It means that in the process of renovation, 100% of the energy used are renewable, and all the materials involved are part of infinite biological cycles that hopefully have the lowest quality loss as possible. The pilot countries of the Drive Zero projects are 7, and we're going to see them later on. So the important thing is that for each country, there is at least one research partner, meaning a university or the, research institute, and at least one technical partner dealing with the technology innovation aspects. Besides those 7 countries, we have also Belgium, because 3 umbrella organizations are based there, although we represent the interest of our members at European scale. The umbrella organizations are us, the Architects Council of Europe, representing architects, UIPI representing property owners, and Housing Europe representing social housing providers. Why is a circular approach needed in architecture? Well, first of all, buildings are responsible for 40% of the total energy consumption in the Europe. So it's quite a lot considering all the other sectors that are also energy consuming. 60% of the energy used throughout the life cycle of the building is the so-called embodied energy, meaning that it's the so-called hidden energy. So it's the energy that is needed to manufacture an object or a building. So from the mining of material, considering also the manufacturing and the transportation to the construction site, then we have the life cycle of the building, and then demolition or hopefully the construction. So this is all the embodied energy. And then 50% of the materials extracted in the EU are intended for buildings. And also, last but not least, 25–30% of the total waste generated in the EU comes from construction and demolition processes. So this process has to be inverted. Objectives of Drive Zero. So first thing is circular renovation of buildings, meaning that we reuse or recycle local available materials throughout urban mining. Then parallel, there is the use of renewable and environmentally friendly materials. And then the two actions are combined to implement a circular renovation. Development of new business models. This we're going to see later on more in detail with my colleague, Professor Elettra Agliardi from the University of Bologna. Clear information on energy performance, because once the circular renovation has taken place, then of course we are to be able to transmit this information to the users, to the occupants of the building themselves. And then, of course, the buildings are also an objective of the project, and so they are all located in the 7 pilot countries of Drive Zero, so Estonia, Greece, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Slovenia, and Spain. This is what how the buildings look like before the renovation. We as consortium, we try to pick buildings that represent a frequent typology in their own country. This was meant also to ensure replicability of the technologies and of the research that has been conducted in Drive Zero. Today's focus will be on Ireland, which is the number 2, and Italy. This is sorry, spoiler alert. This is how it looks like already after the renovation. But my colleagues will explain to you more in detail the renovation process. What about the other demos? So they will be presenting in the next webinars. So as Julia said, this is the first of 3 webinars. So the next one will be co-organized by University of Bologna and Housing Europe, and it would focus on, it would be addressed to social housing providers, but of course everybody is welcome to join. And we're going to present there the Dutch and the Estonian buildings. And then more information will be available soon, but you can still check our website on Drive Zero. And then the third and last webinar of this series is co-organized by University of Bologna again, and the Property Owners Association. And this will be on the 27th of April, and there we're going to present the Spanish, Slovenian, and Greek demonstration buildings. In case you want to know more about the buildings and online meeting is not enough for you, there are 2 real physical events happening in the next months. There's going to be a conference in Ireland at Athlone. It's the city where the Drive Zero building is located, and you can join this conference. You can already register by scanning the QR code on the left. It's a free conference, free access, but the registration is mandatory. And then there's going to be also another visit to the Italian demo on the 20. So it's part of a bigger event of 2 days, but then the visit will be on 25th of May, and more information will come soon also about this event. Here, as a communication and dissemination leader, is my duty also to advertise the project. So you can always follow us. This is the website and the social media. You can also, in the website, register to our newsletter, which is biannual, so no spam guaranteed. Also, considering that the project will end in December, really, there are a few issues of the newsletter coming on your inbox, so feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much. I now leave the floor to Dr. Elettra Agliardi, which will explain a little bit more the circular business model. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to everybody, and thanks for the introduction. I'm going to present to you the basic framework for circular business models as a tool to assist architects in this process. So I'm going to provide you with the general key elements of business models. Sorry. Oh. Right. Well, of course, as also Gloria said, the circular economy, let's say, as a way to promote a much-needed shift toward sustainable development is a key objective of the European Green Deal and a priority policy of the European Union. And as far as companies are concerned, it requires to change the way they operate and therefore the adoption of a specific business model. We often talk about business model innovation, and by this we mean the process of making changes of existing business models in order to devise, let's say, new business models, configurations if the company is already in existence and therefore in transition as far as circularity is concerned, or create new ones with the objective to create, deliver and capture value in a novel way. And the idea is pretty much complex because it is also a challenging, let's say, type of innovation, because you have to think of technological and social innovation in companies and society, but these have to go step by step together with the business model innovation in a way which would be made precise in a few minutes. And the complexity also comes from the fact that the innovation has to do with all stages. That is to say, it has to be introduced in the product design, in production and distribution, in use and of life, and also has to do with the characteristics of the products in terms of longevity, durability, and in particular, implementing and upscaling circular business models requires also policy enablers that put in place and supported policy, and also change of behavior if you want, because this has to lead to a change of consumers' behaviors and education, therefore. So that has to do with laws, regulation, of course, financial support, but also education in order to build an awareness for circularity. And ideally, companies engage in circular business model innovation can improve their, of course, environmental performance, also their economic and financial performance, and improve, we say, resilience and exposure to risks from the environment. So basically, the business model represents a sort of driver for competitiveness and defines a way the company positions itself in the market against competitors. Okay, I mentioned before these three concepts, that is to say value proposition, value creation and delivery, value capture, and these are basic components of the business model. So very quickly, this picture is taken from a paper by Boken and others. And in terms of value proposition, we basically have to do with product and service offering. And the idea here is that, as we make more precise, that in particular, users not necessarily have to own physical products, but value proposition has also to take into account that we have to provide services that satisfy user needs without necessarily having them owning the physical products. But this has to do with product and service offering, while value creation and delivery have mostly to do with the internal resource and capabilities, as well as the value chain, the activity systems, suppliers, partners, and customers. And once we talk about value capture, we basically have to consider how company generates turnover, of course, profits, revenue sources, and the economics of business itself. So broadly speaking, a circular business model is a type of sustainable business models that integrates the environmental and economic value creation by shifting, I would say, the business logic from generating profits, as it is in a linear model, to generating a continual flow of reused, remanufactured, materials and products over time by capitalizing on the value which is embedded in the product. And yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I wanted it to go above. Let's, sorry. Okay, I mentioned linear versus circular business models. I don't want it to be long here, but to the left, you can see basically the linear structure where you have the linear business models, where you have value creation that comes from converting virgin raw materials into new products, value delivery and selling products, and value capture, which is basically from the associated sales and revenues. While to the right, you have the extended value proposition. So you have basically to integrate the right part where value is recreated, the implementation of circular services delivered, where used or upgraded or manufactured products are offered, and this may be also via leasing or sharing schemes. And value recapture has to do not only with the selling products, but also again with the leasing or sharing of circular products. So these are added to the business model, where basically, let's say, closing the loop is integrated through the introduction of the circular products and services. So value here is basically recreated when products are reused, repaired, remanufactured, or recycled materials are used for the new circular products as well. And yes, this is the oh my God, I'm sorry. I don't know why it shifts so quickly. Okay, so this is basically the general framework that we can have, because from this we have a huge variety of types of business models. Let's say that we are familiar with the circular economy, so the idea that we have to incorporate and feature the contributions from a variety of concepts that, broadly speaking, share the idea of closed loop. This is what you have to your right. This goes to the need of the circular business models in the way I just gave you briefly here. And then once we come to the circular construction, here design becomes important. So if we have to take into account the fact that we have to consider the different stages of circular business models, we have basically to focus, as it is written there, on, let's say, three main stages: circular procurement or design models, circular internal production process models, circular after sales, after use models. This provides a lot of categories, but here today we wanted to focus mainly on the design models, because the design phase becomes very relevant, since circular design becomes the key factor for implementing circular goals, as the design of products determines the potential for what? For reducing, for reusing material, for essentially remanufacturing or recycling materials. So implementing circular design depends on, of course, technical solutions. This is, of course, fundamental, but also the business model innovation, which allows us to align business incentives with the costs, benefits of circular design practices, and this has to go together with the social innovation, because this has to do and concern also the way product and service are used. And in particular, as I said just now, once we focus in particular on product and service, in terms of course, the eco-design for customers, because we have always to bear in mind that we need to implement environmental friendly solutions. This practically has to take into account a huge variety of cases. And here you have a list of what you have to take into account in the design phase. I already mentioned the characteristics of the products, so it has to do with extended product life. You have to avoid planned obsolescence by design. So here you have these concepts which would be developed also in the next presentation: the design for disassembly, modularity, and industrialized manufacturing. At the same time, you have to think in the design phase of ways to facilitating repair during use, facilitating product upgrades and updates, facilitating recycling after use. So here you have to focus on the end of life recovery as well. But at the same time, as I said before, we have to move also to different ways of considering, from the point of view consumers, the financing aspect and therefore the payment aspects. Very often you have to think of different ways of payment for use, for services, for performance, and this may be done also expanding rental leasing opportunities, and from the point of view of the organization, expanding sharing platforms, and of course, at the end of the day, what we also want to have and what we have to be very concerned in the design phase is also reducing environmental pollution during use, by use, so energy consumption, water, soil, air, and noise pollution have to consider. So these are things which have to be considered once we work in particular considering the design phase. What we have been doing within the Drive Zero project is to perform different types, I would say, of exercises and assessments, and also different types of ways to assess the different characteristics of the business models. In particular, here you can see that we tried to focus mainly on different strategies, for example, strategies of cycling, strategies of extending, strategies of dematerializing. You can see them to the left. And then we wanted to understand in particular in which stage and for what purpose these strategies have been implemented. So we also asked our industry partners to focus on the different stages of the production process in order to understand whether cycling, extending, dematerializing has been in particular implemented in order to perform value proposition, value creation, delivery, value capture. And so the idea is that the focus here can be expanded in at least two directions. It could be intra-organizational perspective or value network, where value exchange among the stakeholders is considered. And the idea is that at the end of the day, we wanted to try to understand and capture a sort of ecosystem view where we have to combine multi-business models, multi-stakeholders views, and so what becomes very important is also the interaction of different players within the ecosystem. And again, if you go to the strategies, of course, innovation has to be technological. In particular, we can focus on digitalization, which is listed in dematerializing to the left, but also service models. As I already said, you can think of take-back models, you can think of different types of users service models which have to be implemented. And here you have also to think of the consumer new practices, such as sharing or pay per use, as I mentioned before. So different types of models, and also models which acknowledge the residual value for the software user. So at the end of the day, you have not only to consider the technological aspect, the aspect related to the different stages of production, but also a shift in the awareness and in the, I would say, consumer behaviors, so that we can also take into account, in particular, for example, the shift from owning to other social practices, and also take into account the characteristics of the product. Under extending, you have basically longevity, availability, and other types of characteristics. And well, we don't have much time, but in practice, we have been working with this sort of toolbox in order to understand also the limits, the restrictions, which and also the, let's say, barriers that our industry partners encountered in order to implement these different strategies in the different stages of production, and in general with the purpose of implementing value proposition, value creation, delivery, and value capture. You may have a look at this table, which is available in the website, where you can see also some of the important barriers encountered by the different industry partners, in order to understand in which stages of the production process these strategies have been implemented, but also which kind of difficulties and barriers they encountered in order to implement this. Yes, another exercise that we have been doing within the project is to deliver a questionnaire, in particular one in order to understand different important characteristics, different important aspects of value proposition. So we have been asking several questions here. You have in particular a bunch of them, 12 questions, where we wanted to understand the degree of consideration toward the design and manufacturing processes of the product in terms of the strategies that we listed before. We wanted in particular to understand in terms of value proposition how much, for example, and to what extent recycled materials by products, waste from industrial partners has been used in the production input for the product, in which way, for example, the company considered environmental and social aspects of the cost-benefit analysis, and other questions which are listed here, in order to understand the degree of consideration of our industry partners. And at the same time, not only in terms of value proposition, but we also asked various questions more in terms of the value network. So questions that we want to say more related to the organizational value, and particularly in order to focus on the organizational value proposition. That is to say, also ways in which they interacted with the suppliers, ways in which they reorganized their own internal activities and provided services to consumer, in order to understand also the degree of cooperation by companies and consumers. And we asked this list of questions in order to understand that also in terms of the internal organization, but also in terms of the value network. As I said, they organized their activities, and again, this allowed us to give different to attach different numbers, different weight to the degree of consideration that they had. And this allowed us to elaborate the results in order to convert the qualitative answers into quantitative values, in order to understand whether in particular the partners that we analyzed at a high degree of circularity once we consider mainly the value proposition or the organizational value, meaning by this that we may actually have a taxonomy of different types of companies according to the different degrees of circularity that they were able to implement concerning the value proposition of the organizational value. So that, for example, if they had high values on both components, we can assess them as industry partners that achieved a high degree of circularity, or ideally full circularity. If they achieved a high degree of circularity as far as organizational value, but a low value as far as value proposition, we label them as upstream circularity because they were high on organization but low on proposition. That basically upstream means that these are companies that work more on internal and network dimension of the circular economy, making most of them effort not even visible to the customers, while once we have companies which are low as far as the organizational value but high as far as the value proposition, we label them downstream circularity, which are often intermediary platforms. So they have some models which are more business to customer sharing market. For example, enabling companies to communicate much better, the exchanging under, for example, non-utilized goods through the platform. So they have to, they work more in the integration and the communication with the customers in order to implement the circular products and services. And finally, if they were low on both dimensions, this means that they have achieved a low degree of circularity until now, at least, so they are almost linear. So in a sense, we tried to study the way they implemented circularity, not only in how to propose value to customers, but also in terms of elaborating value networks, the way through which interacting with the suppliers and reorganization with internal activities has been provided. And of course, this allowed us to start with the first analysis of the degree of adoption of circularity, and through further assessment in the evaluation, we could try to examine the level of achievement of circularity. So we have different cases here. You have a summary page where you have for different countries, different products and different services that they provided, but then according to this matrix where we have the degree of adoption of circularity, we could provide, let's say, a more general taxonomy of the degree of circularity achieved, considering not only the technical aspects, but also more complex aspects in terms of the organizational value as well. As I told you before, we have to consider, I use the expression ecosystem level, because as we said before, the notion of a business model, circular business model, is a more complex notion than just focusing on the technical aspects. But we will have time to go into details, in particular for two cases later on in the presentations. And here you have, an idea also of the type of products that have been delivered by these companies. Just to conclude briefly this part, the main takeaways of this preliminary part, which is relevant for most of the audience, which is architects or consultants in the eco-design process, is basically the following: that you have to become aware in the design phase in particular, and therefore develop solutions which take into account the following aspects: how to introduce circular inputs, circular product service systems, and how to exploit also the other important element of circularity in terms of lifetime extension, in terms of providing sharing platforms, and how to consider also the aspect, of course, related to products where value recovery is important, and therefore also how to use and in particular reuse waste and elaborate on this, and in particular also how to build new solutions in terms of shared ownership, and therefore considering more the use aspects, as I said, rather than the ownership aspect. And there are already various success stories, and of course we have successful stories also within Drive Zero. And the Drive Zero successful stories would come immediately after my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
And let's go to Patrick. Daly, are you here?
I'm here, yes, just waiting to when you want me to start.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Great, hello everybody. So my name is Patrick Daly from Technological University Dublin, and I'm going to give you an overview of the Irish Demonstrator Project, which has just recently been completed. So what I want to do is I'll quickly go through skip through the Drive Zero intro because you've already been introduced to the project. I'll talk about the Irish case study, the design development, about how circularity was benchmarked. I'll talk about the mock-up phase where we did preliminary testing of the circular wall panels, and then I'll go through the actual retrofit phase and then finish up with discussion on some of the lessons that we learned from the project. So as you know, Drive Zero is an EU project looking with a core aspect of exploring circularity through modularized solutions. We are one of the 7 consortium there, the Irish partner there on the western fringe of Europe. Our case study here is in the center of Ireland. It's a 1970s construction, typical what we call a semi-detached house. 3 bedrooms, and is in social housing owned by the local authority, or what you might call a municipality in Central Europe. So these are our partners. We had research partners and industry partners, and also the local authority providing the building, and a national advisory board providing some input and to the project. So this is the demonstrator. This is our energy rating method, and when originally constructed in the 1970s, it would have rated as a G. The lowest rating, it would have been heated with a solid fuel range cooker and an open fire, and it was then uninsulated. In the interim between the 1970s and now, before we started, it did have some interventions. So we had one property rating at an E1. That was a property with had some double glazing installed and some insulation in the attic, and another property rating at a D1, which had similar upgrades plus a modern heat pump fitted. So the houses were already partially retrofit, and we attempted to achieve a combined 65% improvement for both of those properties. So the measures we undertook were a fabric upgrade, including the modularized system and a small extension. We input new heating systems, new energy efficient ventilation systems, and renewable energy through photovoltaics and new windows and doors. And all of that combined to give us a 65% uplift. So design concepts were really focusing on how we would retrofit the facade, the wall facade. Due to the scale of the project and budget, we didn't feel it was feasible to do the roof, and the roof had already been partially upgraded. So the main intervention in terms of the demonstration of the project was the modularized wall construction and the modularized circular extension pod here. So then we were looking at our our partner was a conventional light gauge steel manufacturer, so they had a system that was being used in construction in Ireland, and we basically looked at how we could adapt this system to become a wall cladding and a modularized extension system, transitioning some of the plastic insulations to bio-based insulations, and also looking at how we would connect and assemble the panels to the wall. So these are some very early concept proposals and an initial concept build-up for the panel. There was a number of circularity assessments done during the project, which were quite insightful and also helped us develop the strategy. We also developed some criticisms of the simplification of that method, and particularly the fact that it wasn't always undertaken at different levels in the hierarchy. But it really helped us develop our thinking about what circularity was, and in particular how important design for disassembly and material specification are to achieving circularity at construction level. So out of that, we focused on this strategy or concept that we would attempt to have full disassembly at all 3 levels in the building construction hierarchy. So at level 1, here we wanted to ensure that the prefabricated panels were able to be detached from the host walls in their entirety, so that they could be reused in their entirety in another cladding or structural context, because they had structural capability, or be transported to a facility where they could be disassembled and disconnected in a structured environment. And then at level 2, we wanted to ensure that the main components that made up the system, which was the wall panel, the window system, and then the jointing panels, so the jointing sections, could all disconnect from each other and be reutilized with minimal impact. And then at level 3, we wanted to ensure that the panel system that could be fully disassembled from all components and products and materials down to their base elements. So based on that strategy, we tried to implement that concept in a mock-up, and this is the mock-up design. So it was partly testing architectural and technical factors, but also we undertook a full design for disassembly audit and actually not only installed the panels, but took some of them down and disaggregated them and then reassembled them and reinstalled them. So we went through the entire disassembly process and reassembly process in the mock-up. So this is the design of the mock-up was based on trying to make sure we were covering all the types of junctions that we may encounter in the retrofit, and quite advanced technical details were done at our first attempt. And central to that was the concept of having an access zone here, that we could get in and access a simplified fixing method so that the panels could be lifted up and off their brackets. The panels technically have no direct fixings. They're held in place by gravity and restraint anchorage. So this was to allow a very simple and rapid install, but also to facilitate a simple and rapid deinstallation. So that was a key detail. And then that was tested in the mock-up, including not just the assembly of it, but here in blue, the stages of disassembly study. So that was quite important, and that was fully documented and monitored. We assessed the amount of materials that were impacted and damaged, but actually that was very little. We did show that we were able to reconstruct the panels nearly in their entirety for reuse and reinstallation. So there's the panels being manufactured, and there's the bracketry being prepared, and then the panels going in place with a backing concept, which we then modified. The backing detail was to take into account undulations in the existing wall construction, and the 3 panels going in, and then we had the roof and wall panel for the pod to go in. And there were significant learnings from that, and the main one was that we needed more tolerance in the bracketry system to facilitate easier install, but also more accurate jointing and alignment of panels. We also were critical of the render system we were using and really saw the need to move to a completely dry system. And also the backing solution was not working effectively, so we modified those. And then we began to take some of those panels down and begin to undertake our full design for disassembly audit. So we disassembled and remanufactured some of the components. So a significant change was redesigning the bracketry and drawing from our colleagues in Estonia who had done a similar bracket system like this in the More Connect project. So we introduced that concept to give us more tolerance in the design, and we changed to a full dry system. Here you can see the roofing, the roofing panel and the wall panels for the extension pod being mocked up. And even from this, there were some improvements to be made with how we were going to make the jointing more weather tight, but that was the fundamental change. And from that, we did some further adaptations and a third installation to look at the process of installing a larger panel system. So the mock-up was quite an essential process, and there was huge learning from that. And then we began to apply that in the final design. So the final design was developing the architectural design with a change in materials and discussing issues around planning. And this was one of the concepts that was developed for that discussion. Then also advancing the technical and detailed design with the specification and detailing changes that were made from the mock-up, developing building contracts and program, and then moving into site works. So we have some examples here from the final architectural drawings from the design. And then we move to site works. So basically I'm going to go through the enabling and then the focusing on the upgrade of the facade on the modular system. So firstly, we have some enabling works, and the facade, the modularized facade has only been applied to the front of the properties. The rest of the building has been wrapped in external wall insulation. So here the building is being prepared as the windows are being removed from the rear. The bracketry is going in for the panels. We have some ground screws going in to take the extension so that we could avoid concrete foundations. There's the brackets now being lined up and installed. And then we have the delivery of the first panels and the crane and the part of the road having to be blocked off to facilitate the delivery and the craneage. And there's the first panel being lifted off and dropped onto the brackets, being leveled up and going into place. You can see it there being dropped in, and the brackets here on the right, how it sits onto them. And it's just then restrained from the top bracket. There's a clip put in to restrain it in place. That's the first panel installed, sitting on the adjustable brackets. You can see the brackets can go up and down and can go in the horizontal plane in and out to give some tolerance. Second panel going in, fully finished, windows installed. Upper panels going in. These had to go in under an eaves projection, so a counterbalance system was designed so that they could be put in vertically and get in under the projection. And then we are doing some modifications to the eaves to get ventilation into the roof, because the panels were affecting the original airflow into the roof. And then the internal windows are removed, showing the new external windows already in place, and they need to be lined out and insulated and made airtight. Then the porch floor is going on top of the ground screws. The wall panels going in for that. Walls and roof going in of the extension, the roofing finish on the extension, and wrapping the the external modularized system detailed to meet the external wall insulation system. Then the porch glazing coming with doors and glazing for the extension and internal finishing. And of course, all that's happening on the outside, but there was reasonable impact internally, particularly all the windows and doors had to be relined. So there was impact in every room, and there was some disturbance to the tenants. And also we were installing new ventilation systems, and those routes needed to be worked within the existing fabric. So that meant some interference in a number of rooms, which was a challenge for the tenants. Then we're coming to begin to finish out the modular system, and the external render system is being finished as well. And we're coming toward completion then with the PV system being installed. And then we come to completion just a few weeks ago, with all the groundworks being finished outside and the roofing being finished on the modularized system. So the main lessons learned from that were in relation to the retrofit works. Obviously, it was quite unique because it was a research project. So actually the team involved was quite large and complex for such a small project. And I think that had communication problems because you would not normally have such a large team involved in a small retrofit project. We were surprised with the amount of impact on the tenants. So although we had a lot of external plug and play modularized solutions, there were still significant impacts on the tenants who were in situ and living in the properties during the works. And that was particularly access to the property because of the porch extension. All the windows having to be lined out. So every room that had windows and doors had some work and tradesmen. The scaffold for the external wall installation caused access issues to the rear of the buildings. And some of the services installations meant electrical cabling and vents and ductwork being installed, which also had impacts. So because of the proximity to Christmas, that became quite a frustration and to the tenants and a problem that we had to manage. Also, for a small project, the availability of trades was quite difficult. Getting tradespeople to be involved in a minor project like this was, for small piecemeal works, was quite difficult. And then in terms of the modular system, some of the lessons were basically that achieving circularity is quite complex. Design for disassembly is really an essential part of it, and that material specification is also really significant in order to facilitate circularity. In terms of design for disassembly itself, the mock-up validated that we had achieved high levels of advanced design for disassembly at most levels in the construction hierarchy. But in hindsight, we felt that the 3D, the extension, would have been much better if we had have designed it as a volumetric pod, and that it was fully constructed in factory with all dry finishes internally in particular. We would have got not only a better quality, but a much faster build. And in retrospect, we would see that there are probably too many layers in the system, which increased the number of fixings and increased not only cost, but complexity. So that we feel would need to be simplified. And going forward then, we would feel that for the Drive Zero project, we probably needed a more comprehensive and diverse partner team at the beginning. So we would look to do it again with a wider team base and a more significant budget and a more advanced circularity system assessment method. Going forward, we would love to be involved in follow-on research on circularity, particularly in design for disassembly and modularity. We see that there's huge opportunity for developing modularized circular solutions for the upgrade of facades and building envelopes. We would like to be involved and see the need for a larger scale demonstration project where we can see some of the financial benefits of scale and more holistic whole building upgrade rather than just partial, and both domestic and commercial. We would think that we would need contractors and specialist suppliers engaged in the project from the start, because it's also about a circular process and circularity needs to be in the whole supply chain. So there are some of the lessons, the overarching lessons that we've drawn out from the project. So thank you very much, and hope that's been informative.
Thank you, Patrick. So we can now move on with Cecilia. Please.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cecilia Mazzoli, and I'm a researcher at the Department of Architecture of the University of Bologna. Today, I will present you the circular deep renovation intervention developed for the Italian pilot case in the framework of the DRIVE Zero project. Sorry, it was too fast. So, as already mentioned, the project identified several case studies located in the partners' home countries on which to apply a deep renovation intervention based on the adoption of a circular approach able to minimize the waste production and tackle end-of-life strategies with a positive impact on the environment. So, among these cases, Unibo contributed with a demo case located in Argelato, near Bologna, owned by a private foundation. The Italian pilot consists of a manor villa inserted in a building complex constructed in the early 1900s and partially demolished and rebuilt over the decades. The complex also includes stables. In 2021, when the private foundation decided to intervene in the building complex, it was very compromised and damaged in terms of seismic safety, architectural and conservative quality, and also energy and mechanical performances. So the manor villas is constituted of a load-bearing masonry structure in solid bricks, and we can say that it represents a very typical rural residence, commonly widespread in different rural contexts of Southern Europe and Italy. At the end of the renovation process, the municipality of Argelato will dispose of a renovated building complex in which the manor villa will be transformed into a multi-user social residence for disadvantaged people and disabled people. And the former bar stable will host social services for residents and citizens, surrounded by a beautiful park of great landscape value. The buildings are not subjected to an architectural constraint, but just to a historical documentary constraint. So the regulations in force in Italy do not allow for deeply intervene in the facades, but just on the roof. So on the contrary, on the facades and on all the other architectural elements, it is possible to just softly intervene. However, it is always mandatory to realize interventions that preserve the typological construction character of the buildings as a testimony documentary building. This issue represents a very important boundary condition to be considered for the design of all the renovation processes to be developed. The construction began in July 2021, and at the end of the works, the end of the works is scheduled for the mid of 2023. In this slide, we can see the specific circular actions implemented. So first of all, we have the reuse of existing materials, such as the 92% of the original roof ceramic tiles on the new roof, and also the reuse of crushed original solid bricks for paving substrates. Then we have also the installation of building integrated photovoltaics panels integrated in the south-oriented pitch of the roof. Then we have, of course, the energy refurbishment of facades. That is one of the main important interventions through two different systems, one traditional and the other one more innovative, designed by the Italian factory Aliva, which is partner of the DRIVE Zero consortium. And last but not least, the installation of new high-performance windows integrated within thermally insulated prefabricated monoblock frames, which also include the related window shading system. So these are basically the most important actions. Sorry. Regarding the refurbishment of the building envelope, here we can see the two different systems adopted. For the south and east-oriented facades, we used a traditional external thermal insulation composite system called ETICS in EPS. This was implemented, fixed and glued to the existing facade for a total thickness of 20 centimeters. On the north and west-oriented facades, an innovative technology designed by Aliva has been implemented, and it consists of a plug-and-play prefab panels filled in with an internal glass wool layer and an external sandwich panel in rock wool for a total thickness of 20 centimeters that is equal to that one of the ETICS used for the other facades. The implementation of two different solutions allowing to achieve the same value of thermal transmittance according to the legislation in force is aimed at testing the technical feasibility and the energy performance of the two solutions. Sorry, again. Here we can see the specific materials and products used for the plug-and-play solution. For the external finishing, we used a fiber cement board that was used as a waterproof layer and as a base for the finishing layer in lime plaster imposed by the historical constraint. Here we can see some pictures of the deep structural reinforcement of the external load-bearing walls through the use of fiber grid bands and other connectors. And here, after the masonry reinforcement, we see the installation of metal anchors for the implementation of the prefab components. Then we had the implementation of these large format panels designed and produced by Aliva. That is completely innovative in the field of protected heritage. So this was the main the most important challenge for our pilot demonstrators. The installation took 14 working days for the two facades, so we can say that it has been proven that it is a very fast assembly system. In correspondence of windows, the prefab monoblocks were positioned and fixed through the use of punctual anchors in steel. And then the voids have been filled with EPS in order to solve the thermal bridge. Okay, and yeah, so this is the final results that Gloria already showed you. If you compare the different facades that has been refurbished through the two different systems, you can notice that there is no noticeable differences between the two refurbished systems. So this results was a success for us. As anticipated, the roof was totally remanufactured through the original system in wooden beams and joists. So here you can see the different phases of the remanufacturing of the roof that were monitored through a time-lapse actions. And then in particular, we can see the two specific circular actions implemented for it that are related to the reuse of the original ceramic roof tiles, 19%, and the installation of building integrated photovoltaics panel in the south-oriented pitch of the roof. So regarding the analysis, Unibo conducted several analyses of the circularity level of the intervention for the 4 different facade solutions. So we considered the plug-and-play and the ETICS solutions in the demo version, let's say, so the ones that was physically adopted in the demonstrators. And then we studied also the corresponding solutions in the original version. That was more circular finally. The analysis considered different values related to different factors, so basically the embodied energy and the embodied carbon values, the circularity indicators such as the design for disassembly, the materials origin, and the reusability of products and components used in the different solutions, and also the percentage of waste and reusable materials at the end of life. Among the two plug-and-play solutions, the original one, including metallic substructure and anchors, and also a cladding in recyclable ceramic tiles, it seems to be more circular than the other one imposed by the historical documentary constraint with its non-recyclable original lime plaster finishing layer. So referring to the business model, the circularity of the business model, as shown during the presentation of my colleague, Professor Agliardi, we can see in particular the Aliva solution. This solution could be considered from two different points of view. We can say that this system presents a medium-high degree of circularity in relation to the technical construction issues, especially for the plug-and-play original solution that is totally dry assembly and so very reversible and effectively conceived like according to the principle of the design for disassembly. But we can say that this system presents a low level of circularity in relation to the more logistics management and the organizational issues as assessed by Aliva itself, which defined this process still in transition for the company. So this was the analysis we conducted. In conclusion, these are the main lessons learned from this experience. We can say that first of all, based on all the analysis conducted, it is possible to definitely assess that the plug-and-play systems are more circular in general than the traditional ethic systems. In particular, the totally prefab systems, so the plug-and-play original, constitutes of full dry assembled components, including the external finishing in ceramic tiles, is the most circular. Unfortunately, this solution was not applicable due to the historical documentary constraint on the building. Then another important conclusion is related to the comprehensive analysis of all circularity parameters that is crucial to raising awareness and understanding how to enhance the decarbonization in the building sector. So it is very important that this awareness is spread at all levels, from the customer level, the customer who must make the final decisions, to the designer who develop the projects, and also to the regulatory institution that defines the laws and they authorize the projects in the regulatory context. Furthermore, this specific case study of an historic villa in Argelato, which represents a large part of the consolidated build context in Italy, shows that the regulatory framework is often a major obstacle to the diffusion of highly circular innovative technological solutions. So this was one of the main barriers that we found in this process, in this renovation process. Finally, another important point is that in order to promote the adoption of plug-and-play and in general circular solutions, it's very important to develop tools for easily assessing the circularity level. So this is a very crucial factor for conducting the processes of design and implementation of circular action. Regarding to this point, Unibo and the other Drive Zero partners are working for developing tools and methods with the same. So we are working on this. And for me, that's all for me. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Cecilia. So we now have another poll. So you should also see the screen now with the poll with the first question. So which are the main barriers during your design experience in renovation interventions? Please select one. Economic barriers, technical barriers, legislative barriers, all of the above, or none of the above. I will leave you a few seconds to reply. Okay, maybe let's see the results. Okay, so mainly economic barriers, but also 33% say all of the above. So yeah, also technical and legislative barriers have been found. Okay, so second question. Have you ever thought about integrating circular principles in your architectural practice? Select one. Yes, I'm already doing it. Yes, I will consider it. No. Let's see the results. Okay. Most of you are already doing it. Third question. How often do you adopt a circular approach during the 3 standard phases: acquisition, use, disposal in your renovation project? Select one. Regularly, occasionally, rarely, never. Let's see the results. Okay, 50% say occasionally, 40 rarely, 10 say never. Okay. Let's move to the other question. How often do you use tools to assess the circularity of building materials, components, and systems to make design decisions? Select one. Regularly, occasionally, rarely, or never. Let's see the results. Okay, occasionally and rarely are 33%, regularly 11, never 22%. Okay, another question. How often do you design with secondary, reused, or recycled construction products in your projects? Select one. Regularly, occasionally, rarely, or never. Let's see the answers. Okay, most of you never. 36% rarely, 18% occasionally. So it's not widely, they are not widely used. Another question. How often does your design process take into account the construction factors? Select one: regularly, occasionally, rarely, or never. Let's see the results. So 38% rarely, 25% regularly, on the other side never, 25%, occasionally 13%. Okay. I think we have another question. It's the last one. Overall, which circular services do you implement as professional and/or customer? You can select more than one here. Rebuying used products, leasing or renting products and tools for the acquisition phase, repairing, retaining for the use phase, returning, recycling or reselling for the disposal phase, none of the above. Okay, let's see the results. So we have 69% repairing, retaining for the use phase, and 62% returning, recycling, reselling for the disposal phase. Then we have 38% of rebuying used products, 23% leasing or renting products and tools for the acquisition phase, and just 15% none of the above. Okay. We have another question or? No, okay. So we will now hear our final presentation from Philippe Mosley. So Philippe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, and hello everybody watching. My name is Philippe Mosley. I'm Policy Officer in DG GROW of the European Commission. DG GROW is the Directorate General for the Internal Market and Industry. And I'm in the construction unit, and I'm responsible for policies dealing with the green transition of construction, which means basically circular economy, and also I work a lot on the life cycle emissions of buildings. And I'll just go to my first slide. There we are. I think that just to give you a bit of context on the policies about the green transition of construction, we have the Circular Economy Action Plan from 2020, which is part of the overall European Green Deal, and this plan to make Europe as a whole move from a linear to a circular economy, which is of course a slow and difficult process. It's going to take time, but we're on the road now, and it's fair to say that Europe is seen as something of a leader in the circular economy, and we've seen only a couple of days ago, more legislative proposals coming out of the Commission about the right to repair products. So there's a steady stream of policies on this. And the legislative context is changing, so we have really a lot now of proposals from the Commission. They're being negotiated in the Parliament and Council on circular economy, but also, of course, the energy and climate files. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is under revision, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and both of those revisions actually make references to the circularity of buildings. Then we know that construction as an industry has an enormous environmental impact, and this has already been mentioned earlier in the event. The latest Eurostat statistic for waste is 37%, 37.5% of all EU waste comes from construction and demolition. It's the single biggest source of waste in Europe, and unfortunately that number is going the wrong way. It just keeps growing. Partly because the building stock is constantly growing because we're building new buildings, and so there's more mass of material to add to the waste mountain. So we need to do something about that. And one of the things we like to mention in DG Grow as the industry DG is to look at the positive side, the business opportunities of going circular. And it's great to see in Drive Zero, you know, we've had some presentations on that, on the business models that we can use. If I just go to, yeah, here we are on the next slide, we have some information there on the EU's construction ecosystem. So the industry ecosystem, there are 14 industry ecosystems defined in the EU industrial strategy. Construction is the second biggest one by employment and also in economic terms. So you can see the figures there on jobs and you know, the companies, which are almost all SMEs in construction, and it's also dominated by micro enterprises and obviously architectural firms. Most of those are micro enterprises. Then we also have the systemic issues with construction of low productivity, low uptake of innovation historically, and as I said, the high environmental impact. We published on the 15th of March the transition pathway for construction, and this is a document, a policy report that pulls together all of the EU level policies that are relevant to construction and specifically to its digital transition, its green transition, and increased resilience. So those three elements, digital, green, and resilience, go right through the transition pathway. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the table of contents and all the themes that are picked up in there. We had a long consultation exercise and many events of the high-level construction forum and other events to co-create this transition pathway. So you can find it in the link, and I'm happy for the slides to be shared afterwards so you can see that. Now, the single piece of legislation that is under revision that is probably going to make more of a difference than any other for circular construction is this, the Construction Products Regulation. So it already exists. It lays down the rules for marketing of construction products and the CE marking. But it's undergoing revision for two main reasons. One is it's not functioning as well as it should in the single market. So the single market for construction products faces barriers that need to be overcome. And then the second one is we need to better integrate sustainability requirements into construction products in light of the EU Green Deal and the move to a circular economy, and also the climate emergency and all of these actions. So specifically on how the Construction Products Regulation is going to facilitate circularity, these are some of the articles in the Commission's proposal and what they would do for circularity. So a lot of the barriers that have been discussed until now in this event would be hopefully, you know, that they'd be overcome with some of these measures to make it easier and put a level playing field for secondary products. So for reuse and recycling, for taking back of over-ordered materials and permit a second life for them, to have a facility for member states to establish schemes at their level. So there's really a lot going in there. And another element would be mandatory digital data on construction products. So there would be the digital product passport, and there would be mandatory carbon footprint data for every construction product going on the market. Optionally, the Commission could introduce requirements for other environmental data, such as recycled content, and possibly we could also require recycled content, but that would be for specific products where it makes sense. And we could have other environmental criteria to do with pollution or hazardous materials or whatever it might be. So the revision of the regulation would empower the Commission then to introduce some of these requirements through future delegated acts and implementing acts linked to the regulation. Let's go to the next one. So we have a study that's ongoing. It's finishing in a couple of months' time. And this is a study that is trying to understand better what the industry is doing when it comes to circular approaches. So we have at the moment certain statistics on things like waste. We have a Eurostat statistic on waste, and we have these kinds of statistics, but they don't really tell us in detail what the industry is doing. So that's what this study is doing, and specifically trying to develop indicators that companies, especially SMEs, would be capable of reporting against on their own activity. And then we also have a new large study or preparatory action on the analysis of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon removals related to the whole EU building stock. This is a project that's going to go on until 2025, and it's going to get us unprecedented levels of data and information on the whole life cycle emissions of construction, and look at the trajectories that each member state could take, the strategies that they could take on a large scale to address, to meet climate neutrality in the construction and building sector. So that one doesn't yet have a website, but that work has started recently. We can also look forward to the taxonomy criteria that are expected to come out later this year. We already have in place in the taxonomy. This is, for those of you who don't know what the taxonomy is, it's the common language for green investments. So financial institutions, when they want to label investment products as sustainable, we're looking to do a common language across the European Union of what this means, so that everybody's using the same definition. There are already criteria in place for climate adaptation and mitigation, and they are in force already, and they include criteria for buildings, renovation, and new construction. And the ones that you can see at the bottom there, including circular economy, those are expected soon. So we would have new criteria then on defining substantial contribution to circular economy from buildings, construction, and renovation. We also have a new study that has just started recently on end of waste criteria for construction demolition waste. So this is the legal definition of when waste stops being called waste and starts being called a secondary material. End of waste criteria exist in certain member states at a national level, and at EU level we have already end of waste criteria for scrap metal and for glass. But the industry has been calling for this in various other waste streams. So there was already a JRC study from March last year that you can see there that already looked across all types of waste and recommended construction certain waste streams, but it put plastics as the top priority and then textiles. So in order to move forward with construction demolition waste as well, we have this study that is doing the first phase of eventual criteria development, which is the background data collection. So where this study is basically going to collect as much data as possible on the waste and the potential markets for the secondary materials coming from that waste. And the high-level construction forum, which is our main forum for dialogue with the industry and also with member state authorities and stakeholders, is holding an event on the 20th of April on the green transition of construction, and all of these studies that I just mentioned are going to be discussed, and also the renovation wave action, the whole life carbon roadmap for buildings, will feature strongly in that event. We're expecting to see the modelling results from the modelling exercise that has been carried out to give the background data for that roadmap. So if you're not already members of the High Level Construction Forum, you can sign up with that mailing list, and then you will receive the notifications of these events. We also have, for a few years now, the guidance document, the Construction and Demolition Waste Management Protocol. This is quite well regarded, it's widely used and recommended, but it's getting a little bit old. It's from 2016. So we're looking to update this with a revision starting later this year and probably going into next year as well. We'll update the document to better take into account the renovation wave and also to mention more clearly things like asbestos, which is an issue that needs to be tackled in the building stock as well. That was my last slide. I can just point you to the link there on our website, which is the DT Grow Construction Unit website, where you can see more information on everything that I spoke about, and I'll be glad to take any questions, or I'll listen later on as well from the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. We move now to our Q&A session. So feel free to type any type of questions you have in the box on the right. For now, I would maybe start with a question to Elettra Agliardi. Do capital and cost-related factors affect the decision to set up new circular business models, and how can they be overcome? If you can also share your webcam. Thank you.
Sure. Yes. Well, thank you for this question, which is partly also a question which was, in a sense, tackled by our audience, because our audience actually indicated among the barriers, probably the economic barriers as the most important, which is interesting because in many cases we have been working in order to define the different types of barriers that we encounter in circularity, and as we know, the literature has stressed different types of barriers, in particular in terms of the external factors, supply chain, market, hard and soft institutional factors. For example, we also conducted within Drive Zero a set of analysis in order to identify barriers in different occasions, and we were able to understand that there are plenty of them which requires attention, which goes from, as we said today, from regulation to the different types of rules, taxation, sustainability policies which are necessary as well, and which have to be implemented by, for sure, by government, but also I would say in terms of some blended finance, and I will come to that please. But I mean, the audience today stressed in particular the economic aspect. So this relates to your question. For sure, we have to take into account different aspects. For example, once we consider just recycling strategies, we have a model which has been developed within the Drive Zero project, where we studied under which conditions recycling is an optimal strategy for companies, and in which way, for example, we can see that this becomes competitive strategies in the market as well. And of course, this depends on the level of prices. So in particular, it is important to understand different elements of prices in terms, for example, of taxation of labor versus the difference between price of recycling versus price of virgin materials. And we have studied under which conditions, in particular, for example, recycling becomes the optimal strategies for the firm. And broadly speaking, this, of course, depends on the organization of the market, and the model is much more complex. But of course, we can understand that in order to implement recycling, we need to have that the price of recycling technology is, let's say, it's smaller than the cost that we have for price of virgin materials. And at the same time, this is something that has to be tackled by, for example, in the forms of subsidies, in the form of taxation. So we have to think, for example, of taxation of labor rather than taxation of raw materials, because we have to understand that the final effective price is also determined not only by the cost of materials, but also on the different taxation that we have, in particular within the different processes. So in the end, I would say that ideally we wanted to think of forms of policy incentives in the terms of subsidies or taxes, and this is mainly from the point of view of governments. But at the same time, what could be exploited could also be in terms of blended finance, and the same way that we have, for example, for other types of climate finance. For example, we mentioned before the different types of taxonomies. Within green taxonomies, we had, for example, the issuance of green bonds. We still do not have bonds specific tackled to the circular products. So we might think that together with the governmental finance could be also private finance. So we can think of some forms of blended finance which would come out, and I'm very optimistic once we have the circular economy taxonomy, this could be done. But for the time being, we can think of forms of incentives mainly from the point of view of the government, as I said, in terms of subsidies, in terms of taxation, and at the same time, the different types of payments that we already have within many contracts in terms of pay for service or pay for performance, that are different types of models that we have already these days.
Thank you. I would maybe ask you another question. So, did the location-specific factors impact the design of circular business model?
Well, yes, of course. Well, we already have an example today. For example, Cecilia mentioned that the Italian case, in the Manuel Villa case, there were architectural constraints. So regulation becomes very important in different cases. At the same time, as I said, there are various types of barriers. I mentioned before hard and soft institutional barriers. For example, we bumped into some difficulties in terms of regulatory environmental rules, and also, and here I'm talking, of course, of hard institutional barriers, and also in terms of different sustainability policies in the different countries. More generally, it is also an issue about soft institutional factors, that is to say, the different types of awareness and different types of urgency, which is, let's say, considered by different users, consumers. We have a study within Drive Zero project where we study the different characteristics, also demographic characteristics, but in particular institutional characteristics of different countries. And in fact, we can see that these may be impactful in terms of the achievement of circularity. So in general, we can say that in addition to external factors which have to do with the different characteristics also of materials which are available, organization of markets, so more related to market and therefore consumer receptivity of circularity in the different countries that we examined. We have very often some barriers, in particular, as I said, hard and soft barriers, institutional barriers, which have to be taken into account, and of course, which determine also a bigger complexity in the notion of circularity. So it's very difficult to adopt a unique model because, of course, you have to take into account of the different impact that it has in the different countries. So this is the preliminary answer I can give. And for the more specific details, of course, my architect's colleague could give you some more specific difficulties that they encountered. But we already had very good examples today in terms of some of the limits of the proposition of circularity in the different cases.
Yeah, thank you. A question for Philippe. Which European policies will have most impact on circular construction?
Well, there are quite a few, I think. I think that, first of all, I mentioned that construction products regulation revision, because that would really level the playing field for circular products. So that's either reused products or ones containing recycled content or so on. But it would level the playing field between those and the new products going on the market. Also, we also need, one way of introducing circular thinking is to use the levels framework, which is the EU's framework for measuring and reporting against environmental criteria for buildings. And this has 16 indicators. And levels is a really good way for designers, especially architects, to start thinking right from the beginning and to be able to measure against agreed and consistent indicators. And levels was developed, with industry, and it's quite widely used, and we're really encouraging the industry to use it. Then also another way to introduce circularity is to think about the life cycle emissions, because one of the ways to addressing lower life cycle emissions is through circular approaches. So in the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is going on at the moment, there would be a requirement for all new buildings to measure and report their life cycle emissions, their global warming potential. And in fact, the European Parliament has tabled some amendments which go even further and would require the member states to do national roadmaps and introduce eventually limits on greenhouse gas emissions as well. But we've yet to see then the outcome of the negotiation, because that's the Parliament's amendment proposals, but the Council, of course, has a different view, and they still have to negotiate all of this. So we'll see what comes out of the revision of both the Construction Products Regulation and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. But taken together, they will have, I think, a big impact. And then another thing on the horizon is there are review clauses in the Waste Framework Directive. So the Waste Framework Directive at the moment has national targets for 70% of construction demolition waste to be diverted from landfill. But that target is already passed. It was in 2020 already mandatory for member states to do that. And there are review clauses for the Commission to consider setting targets for specific waste streams in construction demolition waste. And that work of assessing that will be taking place in the near future. So that's another possibility of looking at the waste side of it. So I think one of the things about circular economy is it's complicated. You need to come at it from various different angles at the same time, and it's not easy to reduce it down to one or two issues. It's really needs a multifaceted kind of approach.
I actually have another question for you. How could Europe's single market support the circular economy in construction?
Well, the single market is one of the strengths of the single market is it allows products placed on the market in one country to have consistent rules with all the other countries. So, and that applies to construction products as much as anything else. And this is one of the reasons why for construction products it's a regulation rather than a directive, because putting products on the market, you want harmonized rules and harmonized also standards across the whole single market for consistency, so that a construction product placed on the market in Sweden is the same product as if it's placed on the market in Greece or anywhere else. And that's why it's a regulation, not a directive, for example, because a directive would have more flexibility for member states to transpose. But it's important for the integrity of the single market to have that harmonization. And that's something that the product manufacturers themselves also strongly support, to have this. But it's true also that for construction products in the market, the construction products regulation hasn't been working as well as it should. There are various barriers. There's a backlog of standards as well, for various reasons. And this is one of the things that the revision of the regulation will try and aims to do, is to unblock this backlog of standards, because the standards, the EN standards, are one of the ways we have the technical certainty for everybody. The designers need to know, and architects need to know, that the products they're specifying are with up-to-date standards. It's also important that standards keep up to date with innovation, because there are constantly new products being innovated and brought to the market. So that aspect of the construction products regulation is really important as well.
Thank you. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I would hand over to Elettra Agliardi for some closing remarks.
Well, of course, I wish to thank all of the participants and also all the participants in the audience. I would just to go back quickly to some of the answers that we received from the polls. In particular, we already probably had a little bit of opportunity to go through the question about barriers, and that's very interesting because, as I was stressing before, the economic barrier seems to be the most important, and of course I can understand that this becomes even more important these days, given the inflation period that we are experiencing, in particular the high cost of materials that we had. So I understand that also from the audience, this becomes probably in some cases and in some more surmountable barrier that has to be overcome, and therefore also, as I said, more incentives from the point of view, in particular of the government, are required. But in general, the second answer was all of the above. So in particular, also the technical and the legislative barriers were given a high weight. And this is very much in keeping with some studies that we had within Drive Zero, where, for example, there are different categories that were identified from the companies in terms of lack of certification and clear long procedures for obtaining a certification, and also, as I was mentioning before, in terms of taxation of labor that often is higher than raw materials, so it makes the labor intensive reuse and recycling activities very expensive, and also in terms of challenges in network collaboration, the difficulty of creating the needed networks of circularity and supply chain dependency to prevent circularity. So other types of contracts have to be thought of in order to make it easier this shift to circularity also from the point of view of network collaborations. So this was very important. At the same time, I think that what the audience showed is that they are very well equipped with the basic idea of circularity, but probably I mean, it is necessary to think more carefully during the design phase about how to embed the notion of circularity in developing new products and also services, and in particular the circular services in terms of repairing, retaining use phase, or returning, and in terms of buying used was less emphasized than what should probably be kept in mind in the design phase. And again, also the small percentage as far as leasing and renting, just maybe interesting as well, because it means that again we have to work more on the different types of contracts that we can elaborate in order to make the shift to circularity more applicable, let's say. And I'm confident that the next steps would be, I'm pretty much optimistic that I mean, both the consumer receptivity and in particular, if we increment education for circularity, we might be able to expand this notion more in the coming years. I wish to thank all the participants. I wish to thank Philip for that very useful framework about what is done and what is doing the European Union at the moment in terms of circularity. And I hope that I mean, this session brought some new ideas, and it's food for thought for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would also like to thank all the speakers and the audience. And just a quick reminder again that you will be able to find the recording in a few days in our Build Up portal and on our YouTube channel, together with the slides. So thank you. I wish you a pleasant week and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.